Chess enthusiasts, today, I'd like to share an intense and thrilling chess game played between Rook, a formidable engine in computer chess tournaments, and myself. Rook consistently holds a top 10 position among chess computers. This game is particularly notable for its bold moves, including a strategic queen sacrifice and a tricky opening. Let's dive into the game. I started the game with knight to f3, this move is very tricky, preventing the pawn from moving to e5. Simultaneously, I am also considering pushing my e or d pawn, but it's unsure for black, so, black responded with knight to f6, after d4 e6, I played g3, however, playing pawn to c4 would have been much better. This move would have created a lovely and favorable position for me after d5 e3, it would have allowed my knight to come into play, giving the bishop to come into action, opening up the c-file for the rook, and set up a favorable diagonal for my queen on c2. Additionally, I could have played the move knight to d2 during the game. In this version, I chose to play g3 as my opening move instead of controlling the diagonal with pawn to c4, when black responded with d5 to establish control in the center and threatened to play pawn to c5. He developed his bishop to e7, then, I struck in the center with the c4 move. After castling and capturing pawns, he made a questionable move by playing queen to d5, offering an exchange. However, it would have been better for him to go for pawn to c5 first, directly attacking the center with the pawn and the bishop. This move would have set up better options, such as exchanging queens or fianchettoing his bishop on the queen side with a6 or b6. He played queen to d5 immediately, giving me the chance to move my queen back and play knight to f3 on the board. Then, he moved his queen to b6, establishing domination over the pawn that could be targeted by his knight on c6. Additionally, he could join his rook on the d8 square to put pressure on the pawn. He could also play bishop to b4 and knight to e4 to attack my knight on c3, pinning it to the king. To prevent his bishop from entering, I played pawn to a3. Later, when I played pawn to e3, he countered with bishop to d6, threatening to strike in the center with e5. I responded by castling first, allowing him to play e5. Then, I executed a strategic maneuver by forcing my knight to move to the f5 square, directly challenging the vulnerable h7 pawn. If he dared to capture the pawn on d4 to attack my knight, I could counter with knight to d5, simultaneously challenging his queen on b6 and knight on f6. He couldn't save the queen because I could capture his knight on f6, resulting in checkmate in one move. Additionally, he couldn't capture my knight because queen takes h7 was an ongoing threat, making the position overwhelmingly in my favor. So at this juncture, he decided to move his knight back to the e7 square to gain the f5 outpost for the bishop or knight, intending to counterattack my queen. Additionally, he threatened to capture the pawn before counterattacking with the bishop. It's also evident that he intends to play knight to g6 to block the queen's diagonal. After the capture-capture sequence in the game, I played knight to a4 to attack the queen, limiting her available squares. When he moved to b5, the position favored white due to the active queen and bishop. Finding the best move for white in this situation isn't easy. Some might consider playing knight to f3 or moving the bishop or rook. However, moving the bishop to d2 would allow black to attack by capturing the pawn on g3, leaving the knight vulnerable. Therefore, I chose to play f4, strategically advancing the e-pawn to open up lines for the queen and bishop to launch an attack. Additionally, the rook file is also open, thus, black opted to retreat his bishop to the d6 square. After I advanced my pawn to e4, it became clear that e5 was imminent. Attempting bishop c5 check to save the bishop is futile, as I can easily capture your bishop on c5. Similarly, moving your knight to a safer zone is not viable due to the h3 move. If your knight retreats to h6, I can counterattack with e5, targeting both your h7 pawn and bishop simultaneously. Therefore, it's evident that neither the bishop nor the knight can move from their usual, safer squares. This led him to play rook to e8, while some might consider playing pawn to e5 to directly attack the bishop and knight. This move weakens the dark square diagonal, allowing black to overwhelm your position with bishop to f5, directly targeting your queen. Consequently, you'd have to safeguard the knight on a4. If you play queen to d1 to protect your knight, black can easily play rook to d8. Extending the queen's influence from d8, this would significantly weaken your position. Capturing the bishop on d6 would lead to black recapturing with a rook, bolstered by two rooks along the file and exploiting the dark square weakness. Additionally, black's knight can advance in the center or the other knight can join the attack swiftly, overwhelming your position and making it vulnerable. If you attempt to capture the knight on f6, black can launch an attack with bishop to c5 check, targeting both the king and queen simultaneously. Additionally, let me share a quote for you. Whenever you feel like giving up, think of all the people that would love to see you fail. So returning to the position, we've observed a variation where playing pawn to e5 wasn't possible due to the move bishop to f5, potentially giving a decisive advantage to black. To counter this, I first played pawn to b3 to protect the knight. He responded by playing pawn to h6 to try to kick out my knight. After my knight reached the f3 square, it became evident that the pawn on e5 creates a heavy attack, targeting both pieces simultaneously. When the knight moved to c6, you might consider playing pawn to e5, but it doesn't create a decisive advantage for white. Black can cleverly move his bishop to e6, directly attacking the vulnerable b3 pawn. Regardless of how you capture the pieces, he can execute a brilliant strategy by capturing the pawn on b3, attacking both pieces at once. After the queen moves, bishop captures bishop on b2 occurs, activating the bishop's diagonal on the king's side. He can then apply heavy pressure by playing rook to e2, supporting the queen on the second rank. This could completely disrupt your position, so let's reconsider the position. In this position, instead of capturing the pieces, I decided to advance my pawn to b4. This move is clever and strategic because it prevents the queen's protection of the b3 square, where the bishop could potentially be active. It also safeguards the c5 square, preventing the bishop from giving me a check. Additionally, I plan to place my knight on c3 to counterattack the queen, which is a strategic idea. He responded with pawn to a5, targeting my pawn structure. However, his pieces are still under attack, so I captured his bishop on d6 first. He immediately captured back on b4, targeting the knight. After I recaptured, protecting the knight with my rook, he played bishop to c4, attacking the rook. I ignored this and played bishop to b2, offering my rook as a sacrifice. Some might think this rook sacrifice is a clever trap. If he captures the pawn instead of the rook, it would create a vulnerable situation as I could then capture the knight on f6. After capture, his pawn structure would be weak. I could target his queen by playing rook to b1, attacking it. And also, he can't save his bishop effectively because my knight is there, leaving his position vulnerable. Yes, after he captures the pawn on d6, I can pick up your bishop on c4, gaining an advantage by winning a piece. This would put you in a strong position to win the game. Let's return to that position and explore further. At this point, he chose not to capture the pawn on d6 but instead captured the rook, as it was the only move to salvage his game. After I captured the rook to attack the queen, his queen captured on b4, then came bishop takes f6, a cunning move with a strategic idea to disrupt his pawn structure. This move allowed my queen to access the open diagonal on the king side, and the bishop and knight could reinforce each other by maneuvering to f5 and h4, weakening his kingside squares. The pawn on the 6th rank also played a crucial role in creating vulnerability in the center. However, I couldn't save the 6th rank pawn due to a lack of support. After moving my bishop to c4 to pin down the pawn, there was a potential threat of the queen coming to g6 to deliver a check. For example, if he played a normal move like queen takes d6, I could execute a check by playing queen to g6, forcing his king to move. After a series of checks, his king would end up on the h8 square, allowing me to capture the pawn on f7 and setting up for a checkmate with queen h6 in the next move. This would lead to a favorable position and the game would be effectively over for black. Let's return to the position to explore further. As his pawn structure was vulnerable and the d6 pawn was under attack, he opted for a safer move by advancing his king to the g7 square. After I captured my pawn, his queen retreated, and my knight joined in by moving to h4. This move hinted at the ongoing threat of knight to f5, where the queen could potentially create a decisive advantage for white and make the king vulnerable. He responded by playing knight to e7 to protect that square and potentially prepare to come to g6. That's why I played queen to e4, attacking the pawn and setting up a strategic idea to maneuver my queen and bishop, with the bishop landing on d3 to launch an attack along this diagonal. After he played queen takes c7, I played bishop d3. He responded with knight to g6, and I played knight f5, delivering a check and forcing his king to move back. Then queen d4 happened, attacking the pawn and getting out from the rook's attack. In addition, the h6 pawn was also under attack, prompting him to respond with queen d8, and I played queen c4. This move was strategic and masterful. It attacked the pawn directly, and my knight also threatened the h6 pawn. If he moved his king to h7 to protect the pawn, I could initiate a heavy attack by capturing the pawn on f7, forcing his king to retreat and leading to checkmate soon after. Returning to the position, b5 was played. This move was crucial as it allowed me to reposition my queen, and then he will get the chance to play rook a5 to attack along the fifth rank. That's why I first captured the pawn with a check. King to h7 wasn't possible due to the queen's potential attack on f7, consequently it can become a checkmate. But don't worry when Stockfish is here, let me motivate you by making a quote. If you don't love yourself, you'll always be chasing after people who don't love you either. After king h8 was played, I moved my queen to c3 to attack the pawn, and the pawn was also under attack. He responded by playing queen to e7 to protect the structure. However, after my knight moved to f5, he checked my king by sliding his queen to a7. This left my king exposed. After king g2, he gave me another check, and while some might consider playing king to h3, it's a risky move. Black could initiate an attack by capturing the pawn on f4, sacrificing his knight to bring out his queen to f3, potentially creating a weakness in my king's side with the g-file open for his rook. So instead of king to h3, I played king to f2. After a check, my king ended up in a safer position on f3. He tried to safeguard the pawn by playing rook to e6, and I responded by playing rook to e1 to eliminate his rook. He then captured the pawn, and in the following moves, I could checkmate him. He repositioned my queen with pawn to b4 to prevent constant attacks on the pawn, and he also positioned his queen to attack my rook on e1 square. After the queen moves to b2, you can see that the knight is under attack. However, if you capture the knight, I can easily capture your rook. This allows me to play queen takes f6 check, potentially leading to checkmate on the next move. In this position, after he plays rook to d8 and bishop to c4, followed by queen to a8 to launch a heavy attack along this diagonal. Later on, he played queen to a8 again, intensifying the attack along this diagonal towards my king's side. So, I decided to capture the rook. After he captured my piece with a check, you can see that the knight is under attack by the queen, but your pawn on f6 will be hanging if you dare to capture the knight. That's why he moved his rook, and I moved my queen. My queen is ready to come into action on the h5 square, and I have two extra knights, which puts me in a winning position. That's why he decided to capture the knight on a4 since he had no other option. This gave me a chance to potentially check him, forcing his king to move to g8. Then I made an absolutely brilliant move. Can you guess that move? Try to figure it out and comment on this video. In this position, I considered that knight e7 could fork the king and queen simultaneously, but this square was also protected by a knight. That's why I first eliminated the knight by capturing it on f6, forcing a recapture. Then I executed a fork by playing knight e7 check. After the king moved, I captured the queen with an extra knight, putting me in a completely winning position. After a few moves, I ended up with the knight at the end of the game and started pushing my pawns. His king was moving around the board, but after promoting my pawn to a queen, it led to checkmate on the b6 square by the knight. What a game! What an incredible game! In the game summary, we can see that in the opening I played, the bishop gained an open three-handed diagonal after a few moves. I then played knight to g5, directly attacking the pawn, which also created a vulnerable situation around the king, with the knight on f4 attacking the queen. It was a mind-blowing and complete game. After a few moves, as he tried to give me a check, I decided to capture the knight on the f6 square, forcing him to recapture. This disrupted the pawn structure completely, allowing my pieces to create an exposed situation for the black king. With a strategic maneuver, I executed a brilliant attack by sacrificing my queen on g6, forcing him to recapture and forking the king and queen. What a beautiful game. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please comment, like and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you all the best.